This report presents a South Africa xenophobia risk intelligence site provides risk intelligence as a service with a focus on strategic and operational risk intelligence that informs tactical decision making by client security service providers. The objective is to support clearer situational awareness, focused response planning, and more effective operational prioritization. The Threat Insight team includes specialists with experience and qualifications in strategy, psychology, criminology, economics, political science, sociology, physics and mathematics, statistics, computer science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. This multidisciplinary capability enables the organization to access and interpret open source intelligence, supplement it with human intelligence, and convert the combined intelligence base into practical risk insight. Threat Insight originated in South Africa and has expanded its risk intelligence coverage across Africa, the Middle East, Europe, North America, South America, and the wider Asian region. This operating model provides contextual insight not only into developments within South Africa, but also into the broader regional and international environment in which these developments occur. As a result, the risk can be assessed in a comprehensive and integrated manner. Threat Insight has an established track record of delivering timely, accurate, and relevant intelligence. Its methodology begins with the definition of a clear intelligence question informed by client requirements. This is followed by data discovery and research, the supplementation of open source intelligence with human intelligence and industry insights, and the processing of data through both artificial intelligence enabled and conventional statistical analytics. The resulting intelligence is then contextualized through analyst expertise and operational experience. The benefit for the client is actionable intelligence delivered timelessly in an uncomplicated format. The current xenophobic analysis is based on 2,230 xenophobia-related events recorded over a 19-year period from 2008 to 2026. These events were separated from the broader crime environment to enable a focused assessment of xenophobia risk within South Africa. For the actual presentation, you are encouraged to reach out to the Threat Insight team, who will share this with you. The current overall risk rating is assessed as amber, positioned at the 50-point mark. This reflects a sustained and maturing risk environment rather than a new or isolated phenomenon. Xenophobia-related tensions emerged within months of South Africa's democratic transition, particularly through narratives alleging that foreign nationals were taking employment and economic opportunities from South Africans. The event categories tracked in the assessment include humanitarian impacts, xenophobic attacks, diplomatic consequences, xenophobic group activity, government response, continental retaliation, and protest or march activity. The assessment also considers the illegal mining environment, which is not consistently reflected in wider reporting but remains relevant due to its foreign national composition and its potential to intersect with xenophobia-related mobilization. Of the events analysed, 910 falls within the critical range and indicate exceptionally high levels of violence. The current risk score is assessed at 51%. The dominant activity observed is the displacement of foreign nationals combined with a partially effective law enforcement response and limited diplomatic engagement. This combination creates additional operational and strategic risk. Within the risk index, xenophobic attacks are currently rated in the red zone at approximately 70%, while protest activity is assessed at approximately 50%. This indicates a clear disparity between the number of protests and the number of high-risk physical attacks, with an estimated ratio of approximately 3.4 attacks for every protest. Government response currently exceeds the level of diplomatic fallout, although diplomatic and humanitarian responses remain closely aligned. Retaliation appears disproportionate to the humanitarian impact and is being sustained both internally and externally. Approximately 9% of xenophobia-related risk and threat factors also link to the illegal mining environment. This environment consists largely of foreign nationals from Malawi, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ethiopia, and Pakistan, with a smaller South African component. It is estimated that approximately 30,000 illegal miners operate across the country, linked to an estimated 14 billion rand informal economy across approximately 6,000 sites. Given the scale of this economy, displacement or disruption is unlikely to occur without resistance. The threat dynamic is informed by research on protest violence. Ives and Lewis, writing in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, assessed protest dynamics across 48 African countries between 1990 and 2015. Their findings indicate that organized protests with clear leadership have a 12.6% probability of turning violent, while sporadic protests without clear leadership have a 20.8% probability of becoming violent. In the assembly phase, protests are generally orderly and controlled, with limited evidence of violence. As a march progresses, however, order can deteriorate. Video analysis indicates that specific verbal triggers, including references to jobs, theft, illegality, opportunity, and protection, can contribute to escalation. The protest narrative may also shift from directly targeting foreign nationals to accusing authorities of protecting foreign nationals at the expense of local communities. During the enforcement phase, crowds tend to disperse into smaller groups and move from shop to shop or business to force removals. This is the point at which leadership breakdown becomes more likely and the potential for violence increases. During the dispersal phase, opportunistic criminal elements may remain in the area, resulting in secondary crime after the primary protest activity has ended. From a crowd psychology perspective, risk increases where crowds exceed 10,000 people in a single area, where protester numbers exceed law enforcement and security capacity, and where crowd size increases anonymity. These factors, when combined with emotive trigger words and triggering incidents, can contribute to rapid escalation. The narrative evolution indicates that xenophobia-related mobilization has shifted through several phases. Earlier mobilization focused primarily on foreign nationals, followed by a more economically directed phase that targeted businesses and economic opportunity. A subsequent phase adopted a white colonial framing, although this appeared to be less effective in impoverished communities where such targets were less visible or less accessible. The current phase, evident from approximately 2021 and intensifying during 2024 and 2025, has broadened the target narrative to include government, formal business, political parties, and the wider economic elite. This broadening of the target narrative appears to be strategically adaptive. Data patterns suggest that mobilization narratives are adjusted in response to their perceived effectiveness. Foreign national targeting provided an initial foundation. Business and economic targeting achieved greater traction. White colonial framing was less effective in certain community contexts, and broader anti-elite framing appears to be the most effective current narrative. This suggests that actors within the mobilization environment may be assessing what generates support, what sustains momentum, and what should be amplified or modified. The assessment also considered whether the current environment supports a third force or fifth column hypothesis. South Africa has a well-documented historical context of third force activity. However, the available evidence does not currently validate the presence of an organized external destabilization operation. At present, the threat is assessed primarily as internal, although it may attract external support or evolve into an externally influenced threat if conditions deteriorate. For a third force or fifth column hypothesis to be substantiated, the available evidence would need to demonstrate coordinated logistics, transport, weapons, and targeting, financing or digital amplification by non-organic actors, and exploitation of violence by specific actors to advance a predefined agenda. The current assessment identifies some evidence of actors exploiting violence or instability to advance their own objectives, but does not identify sufficient evidence of coordinated logistics, externally directed financing, or non-organic digital amplification. As a result, attributing the current environment to an externally orchestrated operation would risk misdirecting analysis and response planning. Several factors may create the impression of external coordination, including suspicious timing of deadlines, geographic coordination, sector-specific targeting, economic motives, and perceptions of asymmetric state response. However, the assessment does not identify a sufficiently strong evidentiary basis for concluding that an external state or external actor is directing the mobilization. The state response appears comparatively subdued on the diplomatic side and more aligned with the internally identified threats within the policing and law enforcement environment. Political entrepreneurs and party actors are active within the environment, both in support of and in opposition to xenophobia-related mobilization. Criminal gangs and networks may exploit the instability created by protest activity, while economic and business interest groups may also seek advantage from localized disruption. Foreign state influence, however, is not currently assessed as a primary driver. Far-right or nativist responses are present but do not appear to constitute the dominant mobilization factor. The analytical conclusion is that further intelligence would be required before the current threat environment could credibly be classified as externally originated or externally orchestrated. External support or amplification remains possible, but the available evidence does not currently support a finding that a third force or fifth column is actively directing the situation. For the period June 30th to July 5th, the assessment identifies KwaZulu-Natal as having 39 impacted areas. Approximately 72% of these fall within a 6-kilometre end-to-end area, indicating that while some dispersed components exist, the majority are highly localised. This creates a more manageable response environment, particularly where business partners and local stakeholders coordinate security planning and operational response. Gauteng has 21 identified impacted areas, which are more widely dispersed and therefore more difficult to cover comprehensively. In the Western Cape, approximately 50% of impacted locations fall within a 23-kilometre end-to-end environment. The Western Cape is assessed as operationally complex because movement between affected areas may be slower and more difficult, creating potential opportunities for opportunistic activity and complicating response mobilization. The remaining provincial exposure is comparatively more subdued. The Eastern Cape has 9 identified areas, the Free State 2, Limpopo 4, North West 2, the Northern Cape 3 and Mpumalanga 9. Where possible, the assessment has been reduced to suburb level to support targeted response planning. A question was raised regarding whether the illegal mining-related dynamic should be understood as retaliation or as economic competition within the mining environment. The response clarified that the issue is assessed primarily from an enforcement perspective. If illegal mining groups emerge in the same area and time frame as xenophobia-related mobilization, particularly where foreign nationals are being displaced, the likelihood of localized conflict increases. It is noted that in the absence of broad union and taxi sector support significantly limits the likelihood that mobilization will expand from the expected 0.1% participation level to a more substantial 2.3% mobilization scenario. The countrywide expectation was approximately 80,000 people, equating broadly to 10,000 people per province, and when spread across multiple locations, potentially 400 to 600 people at individual protest sites. This supports the assessment that activity is likely to occur, but at a relatively contained level. It is anticipated that countries such as Malawi, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Ghana and Nigeria, after the 30 June mobilization, will respond with a diplomatic response. This is anticipated to include tighter travel controls for South Africans, longer delays at border crossings, more difficult entry permit processes, and calls for increased isolation within continental forums such as the African Union and through regional partners in SADC. The second, and potentially more damaging layer of retaliation may arise at community level in affected countries. If large numbers of displaced persons return to countries already facing employment and economic pressure, resentment may increase. Injuries, deaths, or perceptions of mistreatment could further intensify public sentiment. This may result in protests or resistance against South African business operations, diplomatic facilities, or other South African interests abroad, with the potential to become violent in some locations. A briefing participant inquired where the highest levels of support for a march are assessed to be located. I can confirm that KwaZulu-Natal accounts for approximately 80% of that movement's support, with the remaining 20% distributed between Gauteng and the Western Cape. By contrast, Operation Dudula is assessed as having a smaller support base in KwaZulu-Natal and a wider distribution across Gauteng, the Western Cape, and other provinces. Although these movements may be positioned as opposing components, they appear to maintain a close and reactive relationship. Social media monitoring indicates a pattern of mirroring and mimicking, where communication by one actor is followed closely by similar messaging or activity by the other. This competitive dynamic may contribute to mutual reinforcement and escalation. In conclusion, the current xenophobia-related threat environment is assessed as sustained, mature, and capable of producing localized disruption, intimidation, and episodic violence, particularly in areas where foreign national business activity, community grievance, and weak enforcement capacity intersect. The available intelligence does not currently support a finding that the environment is being externally orchestrated by a third force or fifth column. However, the risk of opportunistic exploitation by political actors, criminal networks, economic interest groups, and online amplifiers remains material. Mobilization is still expected to occur, although current indicators suggest a comparatively contained participation level rather than a broad national escalation scenario. KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and the Western Cape remain the principal provinces requiring focused monitoring, with KwaZulu-Natal presenting a more concentrated geographic exposure, and Gauteng and the Western Cape presenting greater dispersion and response complexity. The potential for diplomatic and community-level retaliation in affected African countries should also be treated as a secondary risk, particularly where displacement, injury, loss of life, or perceived mistreatment of foreign nationals occurs. On this basis, the immediate response posture should remain intelligence-led, locally coordinated and adaptable, with emphasis on route confirmation, community-level early warning, protection of vulnerable sites, monitoring of illegal mining intersections, and rapid escalation should conditions materially deteriorate. Thank you for watching this briefing. If you found the content informative, give us a like, ring the bell icon to ensure that you receive updates, and if you would like additional information, please reach out to our analytics or business development teams.